So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. We're going to do a deep dive on the mechanics of 5th edition. Now, before you click away, this is going to be interesting, and I'm going to bare my soul here about how I'm bad at this. Meaning, I feel like I have developed skill as a storyteller, and I find that when it's time to actually use 5th edition mechanics and play the actual game part, my sessions they don't feel like I am in control of them. I kind of lose the grip on them. And so I wanted to talk to you guys about how do you take the rules and insert them without, I'm not good at it. I can tell a story all day, but when you try to put rules to that story, the wheels fall off the wagon for me. So I'll throw it to you, Jeff, first. What do you do? Do you need more information from me?
I think that's a good starting point. Yeah, I think a lot of people, so like I'm a very like mechanics focused person, like in terms of game mechanics stuff. Like I have a history of like very rulesy stuff. Like I was a rules judge in Magic the Gathering, like actual tournament level judge. So I'm very used to kind of working with the kinds of ins and outs of the rules and that sort of thing. So it's kind of very much where my mind goes to naturally. And honestly, I think the first step, and this is, we could probably do an entire video just about this alone, and maybe we will someday, is just like, I think so many people view like rules and story as being like opposite ends of a spectrum, where it's like you either focus on one or you focus on the other. And I think the first step is just to try to clear that from your mind and realize that you can be somebody who cares about story a lot and somebody who cares about rules a lot. And they're kind of like separate sliders that you can move up and down distinctly from each other, rather than being something that you have to go one way or another way. Because I see so many people who will be like, oh, well, I just want to, tell a great story, so I don't want the rules to get in the way of that. Or like, I really like the crunch, and I just don't really want to deal that much with story stuff. And like, those aren't opposite things. Like, you can have a great story and a great game at the same time, and obviously we can talk specifics of how you can do one or the other well, and we'll get into the mechanic side of that here. But I think that, at least for me, that's the first thing, is just kind of clearing from your mind that they're opposites, because they're not. You can do both.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, clearing that sort of preconceived notion and realizing that if you are using minis and a map and everything, there's no reason you can't tell a good story. And when the combat is happening, use facing rules and flanking and whatever system you want. I guess I do understand there might be some people that they lump it in that way because that's the one thing or the other thing that they prefer for one reason or another. But I think that is the other thing, is realizing that even if you want to tell a good story, so you think you don't really like mechanics that much, getting a little better and working on marrying them in a way that works for you can help you find where on that spectrum you lie, rather than no crunch at all, full narrative, I only want a story, or vice versa. Of course, there are plenty of people, I'm sure, that live somewhere in the middle, but no matter where you are, I like to think that this will help you begin to just add a little bit more of one or both of those seasonings to your game, if that makes sense. Add a little bit more crunch to your story and vice versa, just to see, what your level is.
Yeah. And so let me give you an exact example, because this is where I felt it most recently. Was we were running a playtest for our upcoming book, A Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. And so there are these little adventure creators called Cruxes. And so it's this really cool scene that the players have built, essentially. And there's this really high-ranking bad guy called the Lord of Ash there. And that, like, him walking on scene, it's a vampire wedding. It's like all these crazy ingredients. When initiative broke out, I felt like I couldn't use the rules well enough to keep the epic level of... I wouldn't even say the epic level, but the tension. I didn't know what mechanics to use in what combinations. I didn't know how to make the bad guys fight to match the sort of cinematic feel that we've had so far. And I was totally open to it. I'm like, man, I wish I was better at 5th edition rules. That's the moment I thought of it. Now, Jeff, you actually played in this game, So you'll be able to speak to it from both sides. So that's the example. I thought, man, I want this to feel different. I want this to feel more deadly. I want this to feel more like a game a little bit. And so, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, I'll just say it for reassurance's sake that the game was amazing, one way or the other. Like it was a fantastic experience. So that's the important thing to keep in mind, is that like not having one aspect of these different sliders be perfect can still lead to an amazing game, even if it's not quite as rulesy as you want. It doesn't necessarily mean bad.
Sure.
It just means a different sort of experience. So I'll leave that, to start off on the side.
Well,
but as far as kind of getting into that aspect of it, I think something that at least helps me a lot is to like really open up the hood and get an understanding of the mechanics of the game and kind of like how the math works. Because I think a lot of people don't do that, or at least don't think about it. They could maybe figure it out if you gave them a worksheet, but they don't necessarily factor it into like actually running or playing a game. So I'll give an example. And this is, I'm not trying to like catch you out. I'm just kind of using this to like,
Sure.
start the conversation.
Listen.
If you had a level 5 party built moderately optimally, do you know like what modifiers they'd have on their best skill, like total?
No, not even remotely.
So it'd be plus 7.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't. If I guessed twice, I probably would have still got it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's okay. And again, like I'm not trying to like embarrass you or catch you out, but it's just like,
listen, I'm not embarrassed. I want to learn more about. That's literally why I'm here today. It's the only reason. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. So if you have a level 1 character starting out, assuming that you're using point buy or standard array, because you can't take random rolls into account, I think, for this stuff, because it's just too dynamic. You start out with the 15 in your best stat. You probably get an extra +1 or 2 from your race, which puts it at 16, which is a +3 modifier. Proficiency bonus of +2 gives you a +5 mod on average in your best stat as a level 1 character. By the time you're level 4, you're probably putting that +2 into your best stat, giving you an 18 in that stat, which is a +4 instead of a +3. And then at level 5, you get a proficiency bonus of 3 instead of 2, which means you'll have a +7 in your best stat instead of a +5 on average. Now, any one character might have more if you rolled randomly or you've taken feats, or you might have less if you're not building optimally or whatever, and that's all totally fine. But kind of even just getting a baseline understanding of like at level 5, you're gonna have a +7 to hit probably, in whatever your main mode of attack is going to be. So if you have an enemy, with a 15 armor class, how likely is a +7 to hit them? A little bit above half, like 50-60%.
Got it.
Which is, which sounds actually pretty low, and it can be pretty low. So just kind of starting to dig into some of the numbers behind how these things work can be like really enlightening. Because I think I've seen people who will, run a level 1 game and have an enemy with a 20 AC, and it's like, okay, sure, you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a level 1 character to hit a 20 AC is a 30% chance. So it's very unlikely that people will hit,
right, over and over again.
Somebody.
Okay. Yeah. So just to recap, because that was a lot of really good information, but it was also about the speed of a bullet train. So, and so what you're saying is based on point buy, array, the norm, like whatever someone has as their starting character stats, then you add on which D&D 5e uses bounded accuracy. So there's a proficiency bonus that it's every 4 levels, right? That basically goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so and so when you add those together, as the character levels up, they get another ability increase. And so they usually put it in one of those. And so basically you're going to have this sliding scale with those 3 layers: stats, bounded accuracy, stat bump, and it eventually spits you out at it's so impressive too that you can spew all that information off like you did.
Some of it, like the percentages, I'm cheating. So actually, and I'll put all this stuff on the screen when we, edit this all together and stuff. But I have a spreadsheet that I made for this that I'll also link to so people can copy it and use it if they want to. which basically has it so you can just put in a modifier, and then it'll tell you what % chance that you have to succeed on any given DC if you have that modifier. And that counts both advantage and disadvantage, as well as like a normal roll. So I think it can be very illuminating. And I think like if I asked, how much does the percentage chance of having advantage change a roll? Could you tell me? Like most people, I think couldn't. I couldn't until I did the math. Literally right in my own face. I couldn't have told you that.
No,
I think
I wouldn't know it.
Yeah, because I wouldn't know, and I think that's the important thing about this. Is it sounds like something that at some point I would have started watching. Well, okay, I'm a bad example because I'm very interested in this, but you may be thinking, the viewer, I'm not really interested in this. I don't want to memorize all this. I just want to play the game. And that's where this is, right? The thing I want to bring up, though, is this isn't anything you need to memorize. This isn't something that we're not adding anything to the game. It is just important to have that simple experience of going, oh, I didn't realize, just like what you said, Jeff, which was the level 20, the 20 AC against the level 1 character. You don't have to memorize what those chances might be because, like you said, if it's a different point buy or this, it's just good to have that general average baseline of, oh, that's really hard. I need to back that off. So basically, we're going to continue here, but just know that it's not like we're giving you a bunch of stuff you need to memorize to make your game better. It's just like, once you realize some of those relationships, like I didn't think about it, but you're right. The way the stats work, they go up so rarely that you can say something as broad as a level 3 character has on average this percentage chance to hit in their skill that they put stuff in. And I'm like, I didn't realize it was so concrete for so long until you said it that way. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of those things. So if you're unbuckling your seatbelt and climbing out of the moving car because we just threw a bunch of percentages, I wouldn't worry. I think it's going to be very enlightening.
Yeah, and so I want to say too that like so where we live in Florida, they grow trees in the medians, and they have to do it in a specific way where when a tree grows, it will often go to one side, like just absolutely one side.
I learned this usually toward where it's in the sun most.
Exactly. And so what ends up happening is that for these trees to grow straight, because most of them are for the sake of aesthetics, you'll see that they have these cords, these bungees around the trunk, and they'll pull them really hard in the other direction, but that only straightens them. So to me, what this exercise is because, like I said, I consider myself a pretty skilled storyteller. I can weave a yarn, but when it comes down to you using the cool stuff on your character sheet, I need to be pulled in this direction and get some of these hard statistics on my face because I need at least some of it because I have such a flighty baseline of the true rules of 5th edition that I'm like, I need to do a little more homework if I want to achieve this feeling that I think I want to achieve. So I think that you're really spot on, James.
Yeah, and what you say I think is a very important point of just like, I don't like have this spreadsheet up when I run a game and mathematically calculate everything that I'm going to run all the time, but it's like you say, it's just kind of an illumination of like, oh wow, yeah, I didn't think that that if I given a DC 18 check against a person and it's not their main skill, like if I set like a wisdom saving throw at DC 18, what's the chance that a fighter with a +1 in their wisdom is going to even be able to do that? It's pretty low. It's 20% actually. So if you put like an ability that's like, this ability turns it's like a dominate person. It's going to turn the fighter against the rest of the party, and they really need to succeed or else they're going to start trashing people, because that's, that sort of effect is very powerful. Like the way that the action economy changes when you add another enemy who's now fighting the party and losing one of the party. In addition to all the story drama of like, oh, wow, now the fighter's against the party. What are they going to do?
Right.
Are they going to try to save him or are they going to kill him? So when you're setting that sort of challenge that the fighter needs to hit to not have that happen to them, if you set the DC at something like 18, you're basically betting that the encounter goes the way of the fighter actually getting turned. You're planning mathematically for that to be the default state. And if they manage to overcome it, then that'll be a dramatic twist that they manage to resist. Whereas if you make it, a DC 12, then you're sitting at just a 50% chance. So it could go either way, and you can't really, bet one way or the other. Just kind of knowing that, I think can go a long way towards, using these numbers, kind of, and again, it's all probability, so you can't ever hard bet one way or the other, no matter what you set the numbers as. But I think just kind of being aware of the sorts of levels that they can change to can really kind of affect, like, oh, okay, so I've been setting my DCs like so high or way too low. I didn't realize how, much of a challenge or not that these events were, and so on.
And I think you said something very important there that I never thought of, because I had some idea of some of these things, obviously that probability comes in, right? So a lot of the things in the game are random. But what you said was certain decisions you make, even if you go, well, he's going to roll for it, right? I have this enemy and he's going to try to charm this person. You are a little bit preparing, like you said. You are making that decision that more likely than not, it's going to work. I'm going to charm that person. And that's an important thing to consider, because you're preparing, you're prepping all your stuff. But when you're making some of those decisions, you have to realize some of the decisions you're making inadvertently by going, yeah, I'm throwing this 20 AC character at these level 1s. They're going to have an extremely difficult time defeating it. Just, it's good to have that in mind, simply if you can look at that and kind of build it into your prep, right? Where you're like, hey, they could fight him, but after they get 3 hits, he's going to kind of run away and laugh at him, whatever, But again, it's like, no, even though a lot of random dice rolls are going to come in, you are basically saying, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can also help open up, like, as a player, if you understand those sorts of things, like different opportunities to then take advantage of that sort of thing. So it's like, if you have something that's a 20 AC character and you're level 1, then, using things that like restrain or knock it prone, and so you can get advantage, because that like very much changes the percentages, of these sorts of things. Then it's like you can kind of be aware of, what tools to use against these enemies so that you can bring them down more effectively, and and how you can kind of then play with that math, if you understand it, to make something easier or more difficult. Of like, if you have that saving throw, the same wisdom saving throw against the fighter made with disadvantage, for some reason, the percentage drops dramatically down. In fact, since we are using the same math, at DC 18 at 1 modifier, at disadvantage is a 4% chance of success. Yeah. So you're basically all but guaranteeing that it'll happening. So it's just like, if you're, giving things that give a player advantage, or disadvantage, or this DC or that DC, like these things, even if you don't consciously decide that you're like hedging the encounter to go a certain way, the way that you set these numbers do kind of predetermine a likely route for things to go. And like knowing those numbers can help you then plan for those sorts of potential probability outcomes.
All right, so let's do this if you're cool with it, because I think that already has it's got me thinking in a different way. So how would you, and this might be too deep of a dive even for a deep dive, but how would you have planned, I mean, you were part of the session, how would you plan a fight with what's supposed to be a high level vampire, and then a few minions, and there were 3 or 4 of you, based on etc. By the end of the fight, there were 4 of you because someone ended up having to be late to the game. But what do you do? How do you go into that mentally? Because the reason why I want to say this is what I need to prep. I can improv a story fairly easily on the fly and tie pieces together. I just have gotten good at it over time. So that's not where it's challenging. What's challenging to me is I can't improvise correct mechanics. And so that tone and feel that happens, and I want it. I want more of that in my game. So you knew the story. How do you do it? How do you get this final encounter? Where's your head at?
Yeah, so we were level 7 in that game,
yes.
Which is a pretty big, it's a moderately high level. I think most 5e games, that's on the upper end. Obviously, there's a lot more levels that you can get, in 5e than that, but it's at least a kind of a starting point. So the first thing that I would do is kind of check, where we can set DCs and that sort of thing. At level 7, I think you're still working with a +7 modifier in your best skill on average.
Okay.
Checking that. So it would depend on the class because like fighters and so on get more ability score improvements, so that might
Sure.
change. So on average, sorry, I'm kind of checking my math
you're
here.
fine. This is I think how the sausage is actually made.
So if you want something that's going to be, pretty difficult, to hit. So you're maybe probably going to hit, but not every single time. You probably want, armor classes of like 16 to 20, where 16 you have a 60% chance, so a little better than half. 20, 40% chance, so a little bit lower than half. Which is basically you're gonna bring down the damage enough that it's not gonna, people aren't just gonna be wailing on your enemy all the time. And then also looking at damage, which I think can also be a whole nother thing. Which there are ways to check all those averages too. Like the average result of any damage die is whatever the D number is, half that plus 0.5. So like the average result of a D8 is 4.5. The average result of a D20 is 10.5, so you can kind of then gauge damage and hit point pools too. So if your fighter takes average hit points, and has a +3 con, you can tell how much hit points he's going to have. And you can kind of then judge if this guy does 3d8 plus 5 damage for his spell attack, that's going to do 18.5 damage on average. So if they're going to do that to just one person and they only get one action per round to do that, spell attack or whatever it is, that's going to be really difficult for that guy to kill any of the party members because he only gets one turn and other party members have 4 people and they're just going to trash him, which is what makes kind of single enemy combat, so difficult.
But for the sake of time and for the sake of the cool story, I let it happen. Like, I saw it kind of going that way, and I thought, oh, I didn't plan well enough for. I knew. I was like, that's probably when it hit, and I was like, okay, when you guys started hitting him really hard, and at level 7, he's a vampire, so there were some resistances and stuff. But the thing that I was like, oh well, but they're all using magic stuff and magic weapons and magic, spells and things. So I was like, okay. Looking at the stat block, I'm like, so they're doing kind of full damage. Now, I will say this. I took away one of his abilities. There's an ability where he essentially gains life back every turn because he's a vampire. Like he regenerates, but I thought this session will go on for 4 hours. So I thought I'm going to take away, and I consciously chose to take away his regeneration, but I left everything else. But I knew right away when it was like, boom, 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 and then, oh, it's my turn. And I could do a little bit, and it was like boom, boom. I was like, okay, they're gonna drop this guy, but that's okay. I'll make sure that it works out. So that's actually a really good distinction, which is, the damage output, just very simply.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the easiest way I think to like make an encounter more challenging is to like up the amount of damage more than you think, and up the amount of targets per attack probably more than you think. Like if you have one big boss and he's hitting one player per turn, you should be doing like half their health or more per attack, or else, you're just never, it's not going to be a challenge at all, because of how much the players can just gang together and be just, because I was a level 7 cleric. So I had like spirit guardians that I was concentrating on while casting guiding bolt every round. So I'm doing like 5d6 plus 3d8 every round, which and you can you can figure out exactly how much that damage that would be, but it's a lot. So and everybody else is obviously taking their own turn, so the enemy needs to be able to push back against that much damage, and either be able to survive it or be able to hit the players back just as hard. So they have to think about, do I want to maybe cast a healing spell, or can I still do my 35 damage or whatever this turn, and kind of figuring some of that, like just at least being aware of the math. And again, like I don't calculate all this stuff out for all the games that I play. I don't think you need to, and I don't think it's necessarily useful to do that specifically for everything. But at least trying it once, I think, can really help to kind of get your mind in like, oh, this guy doing 2d8 plus 5 to my level 7 party is actually like almost nothing. Like that's like, scratching them once a turn as they're like wailing on him.
Yeah.
So maybe it should be 5d8, instead or whatever.
Exactly. And I think that's the important thing. Again, like you said, this isn't stuff that you necessarily break out every time you're prepping. It's just kind of rough concepts to keep an eye on, because there is the idea of challenge rating in most editions of D&D and in 5th edition. But my understanding is the way that breaks down, it doesn't account for things that granular, right? Where there is a CR of something you could put up against your whole party that, they should be able to fight. But like you said, it just comes down to, it doesn't matter how big that dragon is. If it only has 1 or 2 attacks every round and there's 4 or 5 party members, that matters. Now, in such an extreme example, like you said, this dragon might be doing, 2 attacks, 3 attacks, and potentially, a lot of damage each one. But again, if it's challenge ratings matched up, you're like, well, yeah, but at that point, then your fighter's probably doing 3 or 4 attacks. Like you said, your cleric's doing a bunch. It's just important to keep in mind that, just think of it, that gut check of, oh, okay, wait, so how many rounds would it take them average damage to kill this person? Just that quick math of like, oh, wow, it would only last 3 rounds and he'd only be able to do, kill one person and get the other to half. Maybe I should rethink this. So it's not something you have to have the spreadsheet in front. It's just, again, good to have those concepts of like, well, let me just think a little deeper about this before I throw this at them.
Yeah, and so practically speaking, so basically what I should have done is, and I'm just thinking out loud, hey guys, what hit points do y'all have before we start the game? We had a chat going of prep and everything. So it was like, all right guys, what is your max HP? Okay, and then kind of write that down, and then what is your level, which I knew what that was. And so based on the math you said, and I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on this, but based on the math you said, I always try to think of shortcuts and things that I can easily remember on the fly. So I'm like, all right, so based on the layers we did, the 3 layers of how we reached that +7, if you take the player's level and assume that roughly their highest stat is that, it's not perfect because the bounded accuracy, but you can say, okay, level 7, they're going to have at least a +7. That doesn't necessarily stack for level 8, 9, and 10, but you'll be close, meaning you could ballpark it and you wouldn't be way off. If I go, okay, level 9, I have to assume they're about, +7 to 9. So taking it that way, and then I say, all right, cool, so I know that all of them are that, and that helps me decide how much I'm going to do per round, damage-wise. Like, all right, cool, if I'm going to have one baddie, taking your advice, I'm going to do about half their damage, or like a quarter of a damage per round of their health, rather. And then the armor class, I'm going to make it at least double what I know they have. So like if they're a 7, I'm going to make it at least a 14, depending on how often I want them to feel like they're hitting. So again, it's just kind of making those decisions, but I'm just starting there, and that doesn't take into account resistances and regeneration. But I wouldn't even take that. I'd say my baseline math is level 7s. All right, I'm going to double 7 and make the AC at least 14. All right, now I need to assume that they are doing at least +7. Okay, how many hit points do you have? Perfect. And just start there, and then I can kind of build the economy around that. I mean, does that track?
Yeah, basically. And like stuff like hit points, you can even like assuming, because like, so I guess a flag that I'll plant is that like in my games, I always do point by stats and average HP. Like I don't let people roll because the variability is just too dramatic. So that makes it even easier for me, where in the sense of like, I could tell you exactly, without even needing to ask, the person playing the fighter, if you're a level 7 fighter and what's your con mod? +3. Okay. You have 60 hit points.
That's brilliant.
Like,
exactly. Like that's it. Yeah. You'll always know that. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. So
okay. Yeah. So then if I have an enemy, and he has 2 attacks per round and he's dealing 20 damage per attack on average, which you can give them, however much, 3d8 plus 5 or whatever, that it would take for that to be the case. I'm making that one up.
Exactly.
That was pretty close. But then you can kind of take that and say like, okay, so if he's doing that twice per round, doing about, 30 damage with 3d8 plus 5, then that'd kill the fighter in 3 hits, which is pretty good considering that, he can also hit other people and you can spread the damage out or have AoE attacks that do a little bit less, but to everybody. You can kind of say like, okay, so attacks that do like 15 to 30 damage per hit, 2 or 3 times per round is going to really start to eat at people's hit point pools pretty quickly. And I think that, at least for me in general, more damage and faster rounds is better. So I'd rather have, the party do a lot of damage to my enemy and have him do a lot of damage back. So I can already kind of tell you about the sorts of damage rolls that I would have that enemy make, just because I know what level the people are and how much hit points that they'll probably have, and so on.
Yeah, and I think that exactly what you said there is important, because whether you like it to be that way, a fatal combat where it's high damage, or you like something different, having an idea of how that all shakes out allows you to make that decision. Or if you were a little different than Tim's situation, but in the past, I've had that where it's like, man, I threw a combat in there that I thought would be pretty quick, and it went on really long. And then exactly that, I was like, oh, okay, well, if they hit more often and they do more damage, it's going to end faster, And it's but having a baseline of how to turn that knob, how to slide that slider is good, again, even if it doesn't come up during play.
Yeah, and you can do the same sort of stuff with like status effects and stuff like that, where if you have an enemy who can paralyze a player and that player doesn't have like 2 attacks that all do a d8 plus 5, you can say like, okay, so that's like, 15 to 20 damage every turn that this enemy is now not going to be taking because I've paralyzed the fighter,
Exactly.
and so on like that. You kind of start to use that to then like reverse engineer. Okay, so if I have it so we can paralyze this guy, then I should give him a little bit less hit points, because if that paralyze goes off and they're not doing that damage and he's still doing, 40 damage to all the party members, then now suddenly the math has like magically tipped way against the party, because of how the action economy changes,
See, that's really smart. So 2 things. The first thing is I've never had one feeling or another about like how you get your stats. I'm just like, yeah, that's fine, just roll them. Or rolling seems more fun, but because of how swingy it can be, like you're saying, right? No, listen. But so I'm just saying that for me now, I can't think of a better reason other than you'll know the exact math if you just stick to this. So now I have just shifted, because I was just like anecdotally like, that's fun, roll 3d6 down the line or whatever. Now I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to do standard array or point buy as a norm. And then for that reason, because now I'm like, oh God, that's so easy. Because now I can just go, cool. Yeah. So it's going to be about this. What's your con mod? Like you said, and perfect. Boom.
Well, and then, it touches on something that is an entirely different topic in itself, but it's deciding what to randomize. There are some things that make sense to randomize and some that don't. A good example is, like a really heavy-handed example is, I would almost never roll on a roll table of an outcome of a story, because it's like, oh, and then the hamster got the magical crown. I'm like, well, where did we get this? You know what I mean? When that's random, you're like, okay, the world is showing. It's the frayed edges are clear or whatever, however you want to put that. Whereas in that case, where you're like, every die roll is going to be random. If someone's rolling dice. So you're like, well, just making those decisions consciously based on what they change and how things work, it does make perfect sense. Because for stuff like that, Tim, where just like we were talking about at the beginning, finding where on those 2 different spectrums you lie, I like rules a little bit went up a tiny bit, but the amount that you like story didn't change. It just allows you to better tell a story, to know some of the math behind it.
Yeah, and I think... So to kind of hit another point that you mentioned there of like how you get your stats and stuff like that and it's just like finding the degree for your table is always going to kind of depend, because like, hey, if you like rolling stats and you like rolling hit points, like by all means go for it. Just know that it's going to lead to more unpredictable outcomes in the game, and maybe you like the chaos of that, where you have one guy who has a +8 to hit and another guy who has a +2 to hit because his stats suck, and that's funny or whatever. Like that's fine to do that way. And you could even take it the other way if you wanted to, which I think what'll be too much for a lot of people. Of like, you can standardize all these things even in game. Of like, okay, so you just automatically do average damage per attack. So if you have a D8 and a +4 damage, you do 8.5 damage every single time, because that's the average result. And then you could literally calculate the combat, to like mathematically be accurate to exactly what'll happen. And I think like for me, that would be too much. Like I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like as a player, knowing that the combat had been mathematically predetermined to precisely play out in a certain aspect. Like, I think that would be less fun for me. So finding the exact level that you can do these things, you know, can be different. So that's like, I prefer to have, you know, hardline stats, you know, where it's point buy and average HP, but with random damage rolls, you know, still in the game, because that excitement of, you know, rolling all sixes on your guiding bolt or rolling the one on the crit, you know, like those things are interesting to me. So like finding the level that you want to kind of, you know, determine the game versus randomize the game is very important, and it's totally table by table. Like if you want to do 3d6 down the line stats and rolled hit points, go for it. But, you know, it does make it more difficult then to like plan a combat that's going to be like sensible to a certain outcome, which maybe you want, maybe you don't. And there's nothing wrong with either option. This is just like my preference.
Yeah. And so this leads me to another thing, which is, again, it's a very, in the same way that hit points and stats are, I've always done it just by gut feel, like, yeah, let's do it this way. And so I want to know the Doty way. How do you do crits? Because this is a huge factor. So in the same way that it can be really swingy and every other thing we've talked about, I've seen crits done multiple different ways. How do you do them in line with the other philosophies we've established you like?
So I've actually I've jumped across a couple different methods over the years. My current favorite that I like for crit damage is that you roll your damage like normal, and then you also then add the same dice that you used for that, but the max results of that dice. So if I'm hitting you with a D10, you know, plus 5, I'll roll a D10 plus 5, but then also add 10 damage, like the max result of a D10. Which it kind of gets that nice mixture of rolled damage and like, because I like swingy damage rolls, but I think there's nothing worse in a game than the feeling of like rolling a crit and then you roll 2 ones on your damage, and it's just like, oh great, my crit did 6 damage. Wow, like what an amazing feeling, and I think that sucks.
That's actually another good example of a decision to randomize a specific thing, because if you consider, like, especially in that case where you get half rolled and half not, you're always doing as well as you could have, and then the other die is extra, which means that as people, generally, we will feel a lot better because you're getting your already result. That was the results of the crit. Whereas, like you said, okay, roll 2 dice. You roll them both, you get a 1 on each one, you did 7 damage. And like you said, that doesn't feel good, and there's no upside to that, right? Like, yes, you could not do well on a critical hit, but to me, that's not fun. So you're like, well, okay, let's make that decision based on what's fun, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and that exactly what you said is kind of how it ends up playing out. Of like, okay, so now I know if I'm, you know, have a D10 damage dice and I have a +3 damage mod, like I'm gonna do 14 damage on a crit no matter what, which is it's pretty good. Like that's, you know, you're not gonna complain about doing 14 damage in one fighter attack, you know.
Yeah.
But it could also be 24 damage, you know, if you roll a 10 on the extra dice too. So it makes it so crits always feel good, and they could even be like amazing. Which I think for me is a good baseline of like, yeah, randomizing some of it, but then also making sure that certain things always have certain effects, which is something that I care a lot about in my games.
Yeah. And I think so, James, the way you put it was, it's randomizing the right elements. And to me, the randomization has already been in that because it's a crit. So it's a 1 in 20 chance to do something. Some mechanics make that a 2 in 20 chance and things like that, but it's not a super common thing. So that was the randomization. So that part, now you've gotten through, you paid the ticket price. Hey, I got my 20, what do I get? And it's exactly, the next part should be choosing from 3 awesome things, not the chance of something bad after you've gotten through the randomization pool. So that's actually a really good distinction. So again, there it is. So I adopted that way to do crits. So yeah, that's a really smart way too, because I like that it's like, you at least get this, and then let's play the dice. Like, you still get that fun randomization element of, what did you roll? Very smart.
There's still some swing there.
Yeah. All right, well, I guess we'll circle around and say, is there anything else you guys really want to hit on? Anything else you want to talk about that is important to this part of the discussion before we sort of wrap things up?
I'll just reiterate on something that you said that I think is just important here. It's just like, it's okay like to not know these things. I didn't know most of it until I decided to look into it for this sort of thing, because I think most people do what you do, Tim, which is just like, this feels fine, like, and it's just like, that's, that being a little bit more aware of like how these numbers work, I think does nothing but good for you. You don't obviously have to go super deep into it, but just kind of knowing that the numbers that you pick matter will change the game, and that you can kind of use those to, again, you can never be certain because it's always a dice game in the end, but you can start to plan for a kind of broad picture of how things play out. But that there's no like shame or being like, I'm not like a smarter person because I have these numbers in front of me and I can look at them, and you're not like stupider for not knowing them. It's just kind of, the more that you can be aware of how the game that you play works, the more that you can use that to your advantage and plan for certain things. And I think that makes you not just better at the game, but better as a storyteller, because you can plan for the game to lead towards the story that you want to tell, and that I think can help you out in kind of both ways that way.
Exactly. And I think, again, just like you said, you don't have to know these things, but if you've ever felt yourself thinking about a combat and, man, where did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? This sort of thing gives you a place to look, right? Because you can go, oh, well, the monster hit really hard and they all died, and that's not what I was expecting. For most people, without these numbers, you may not necessarily know why that happened exactly. Obviously, the monster was doing too much damage, or they weren't doing enough damage to it. And you can kind of guess about some of those things. But if you want to not let it happen in the future, you can go, oh, okay, well, here, using these things. So again, it's just like, it's just widening your knowledge a little bit so that you can be more prepared. And so that when you do have a problem, you have a better set of tools to troubleshoot that problem. If you're like, oh, I wanted to do this, or I want to do this, so what do I do? Things like that help you. But again, you don't even necessarily have to worry about them in the game. They're just kind of in the background, like many of the other rules.
Yeah, and so I'll say this. So I know how to play D&D. But that doesn't necessarily mean I know the rules.
Yes.
Which is a strange thing to say, but it's so true, because I know plenty of guitar players who, they don't read music, but they know how to play a guitar and they know how to play a song. And so but in the cases that you're saying, like Jeff, you made a really good example though. When you do learn a little more about how to read music in theory, it usually helps along your ability to improvise and play in certain ways. And so I'll say this. One of the most exciting prospects on the channel right now is that I'm excited to learn how to play D&D with the rules. Because we've done plenty of videos on like how to play D&D. And I'll go up against anyone. It's like, well, no, you don't know D&D if you don't know the rules. And it's like, no, that's not D&D. So it's whatever you make it at your table. And so I'm excited to go, okay, cool. I've done a lot in the past that wasn't based on what you said, using these specific numbers. And so I feel like it's only going to get more focused. Like you said, I can direct the story now because I know how to place these tools and these numbers to create a sense of danger or to create a sense of ease or whatever it is, rather than you feel like you're in danger, which is what I have to rely on now. So I'm excited to learn to play D&D using the rules. And this was like the first video pointing to that. So, and I'm really happy with what I learned in this discussion.
Yeah, I guess one quick administrative note is just I made a spreadsheet for this video that I can basically put in modifiers and dice and things like that, and it'll actually tell me probabilities and averages for like DCs and damages and stuff like that. I'll link that in the description so that you can make a copy of it if that's the sort of thing that you think could help illustrate for you. So yeah, feel free to check that out if you want to, but otherwise, I think that'll do it for me.
That's awesome, guys. Well, we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, tabletop games. if you like those things, then you're at home. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can see when we do make videos. What I'd like to know is in the comments is what do you want to work on as far as at the table with you? For me, it was the mechanics, and I felt like I wanted to incorporate more. What about you? What do you feel like, yeah, that's that thing I want to get a little better at? Because maybe we'll do a topic on it in the future. Like maybe that'll be another video we can do. So you guys want to do a Tabtarian toast?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything that you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.